Everybody should take their seats, please. Thank you for joining us this morning at the RVW Summit. It's a particular privilege for us to welcome not only all of you who are our guests, but particularly our two featured speakers. The one is Apollo Lupescu, who's absolutely spellbinding. I don't have to tell you, you'll actually find out for yourselves why, having heard him recently, we absolutely insisted that we do an event in which he would be the keynote financial speaker. And then we have Steve Siegel. So we really have a two-part program today. One is for all of you, which is about investing and the RVW investment process and how we go about that. And the second one is an estate planning workshop, a high-level estate planning workshop to which you're all invited, but it is going to be technical, and Steve Siegel is a lawyer's lawyer, and he'll be going through some really amazing, groundbreaking stuff. He's kind of like, if you ever saw Siegfried and Roy in the old days, he's the Siegfried and Roy of tax and estate planning. And if you do stick around, you'll come away with some absolutely amazing ideas. He and I had dinner last night, and my head was swimming after some of the. I said, "Well, what's the magic, Steve? What's your magic? What's in the toolbox that you have? What's amazing?" And he absolutely dazzled me, seriously. So, but it is high-level stuff, and it is technical. And so, at the end of the first presentation by Apollo, we're going to let anybody who needs to leave or wants to leave go, and those who want to stay, you're in for a real treat. Just a little bit about Apollo. We sent you his resume. He's a senior vice president at Dimensional. Dimensional is really considered to be the Rolls-Royce of wealth management fund providers. We are deeply honored to have a decade-long relationship with Dimensional. Their work is basically derived from evidence-based investing strategies. So they're not in the world, as we are not either, in the world of predicting, forecasting, and analysis in the way that the Wall Street machine does it, constantly pumping out new products, new exciting investment opportunities, new strategies that, of course, all with the fullness of time, tend to show what they really are, which is usually concealed, well-concealed commission generators for the people doing the sales. We have profound disrespect for the typical Wall Street machine, which is why RVW came into being in the first place, having had a lot of experience referring out to the charlatans of Wall Street. And those of you who've looked at any of the movies of 2008 or experienced the 2008 collapse will know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm happy to tell you that most of the RVW people have actually been on the dark side. When you ask them why they joined RVW, they will all tell you the same thing, which is we came to reclaim our integrity. We're very proud of that, by the way. So the RVW story really is one of seeking a rational, logical, scientific basis for approaching wealth management. And you will hear from Dimensional, who are one of the people on whose shoulders we sit. We sit on the shoulders of carefully selected people, teams, and companies. And one of the primary companies on whose shoulders we sit is Dimensional. You will find out for yourselves why in just a moment. So RVW really came about because we wanted to devise a wealth management process which would allow people to sleep peacefully. And we actually decided on the name RVW in honor of that great American hero, Rip Van Winkle, who taught everybody that it's actually possible to have a long, peaceful sleep, provided that you're not disturbed. And that is our goal. Our tagline is, because peace of mind is everything. And that's what we promise people, peace of mind. And what else could one want from a portfolio? And that is our focus and our goal. And with that in mind, it gives me much pleasure to introduce Apollo, who, as you will find out, is exceptional, and it's an honor for us to have you, Apollo. One more thing, please remember at the end of the presentations to switch your cell phones back on. Thank you.
I didn't mind. Well, thank you, Selman. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and thanks to all of you for coming. And as I was listening to Selman, this idea of evidence-based investing, it's something that, as you were saying that, it reminded me of something else. And it reminded me of the fact that today in the world, most of the decisions that we make are no longer based on observation or hunch or just what we believe, but rather the really smart decisions today, they're based on data. And the reason that kind of resonated is because I have some doctors who are my friends right in LA, and a while ago, as they heard this term evidence-based investing, they relate to me something that I wasn't aware of, that in medicine, up until a few decades ago, people used to be treated based on the doctor's experience or the observation of their own knowledge. And several decades ago, the whole profession of medicine switched to a different way of diagnosing and treating patients. And today, in fact, there is a specific term for that type of medicine. I mean, you shake your head, you know what it is? Evidence-based medicine. So this is not something new. This is not something new. This has been with us for a long time. I think the difference is that in investing, there's so much money to be made by the people who are pushing a different agenda to keep you in the old days that it hasn't permeated quite to the retail investor. And what I want to do today is really highlight what I consider to be the 4 major tenets of a systematic approach to investing, something that is evidence-based, and to highlight how is it better for you and why should you care? Why is this better than something else that you could be doing? So that's kind of my goal for today, to highlight the 4 major principles that I think all of us as investors should really try to understand, because they will help us have a better investment experience. Now I'll start with the first one, which I think is the fundamental one. That there was a time when successful investing was defined as buying the right company. How many of you have thought that in order to be a successful investor, I need to know exactly what's the next Apple, what's the next Microsoft, what's the next big high flyer? How many of you have thought about that and searched for that company? I can raise my hand because I was looking for that. And I thought that was successful investing. The first book I ever read on investing was written by Benjamin Graham. Anybody familiar with that name? Benjamin Graham? He was, yeah, exactly. And he was Warren Buffett's mentor. And I said, well, if that guy was Warren Buffett's mentor, I might as well listen to him. Because look at Warren Buffett, came up pretty well. And then I sort of realized that what he was saying was quite interesting. What he was suggesting is that when you make decisions about investing, you should be making them based on data. Analyze companies. Look at their sales. Look at their company, their numbers, everything there is to know about a company. And you find the right company, and if it's a good value, then you buy it. And to me, that's how I started investing, thinking that this is the way to do it. So 25 years ago, I analyzed companies in great detail. And at some point, I realized that even as I analyzed a lot of these things, I'm not really getting an edge. And I wasn't sure, why am I not actually doing that well? And soon enough, it hit me why. Today, in the world, I'm not the only investor looking at this. 3 things have changed since the time that I started investing and doing this. The first one is that information travels a lot faster. Back 25 years ago, it might have been a minute or 2 or 3 before you got information to everybody. How long do you think it takes for information to travel today? Nanoseconds. It's in a fraction of a second. Secondly, what type of information is available to investors? The thing that hit me back then, this is like 50 years ago, there was a company that launched mini satellites into space, and their sole mission was to snap pictures of Walmart parking lots and count the number of cars. And the software would then sell that information to investment managers who would infer whether or not sales for Walmart would be higher or lower. That's the level of information that everybody in the market has. So what is it that I know that everybody else doesn't? The answer is nothing. Most likely I'm at a disadvantage because I don't know enough relative to everybody else. And the third one is that today in the US, investment management is not competitive. It is hyper-competitive. There are more professionally managed mutual funds in the US today than there are stocks trading on the market. So if you're thinking that you have an edge because you research a company, I got news for you. There's a tug of war. On one hand, there are a bunch of Harvard MBAs and PhDs. On the other hand, there's some Stanford MBAs and PhDs that have different opinions, and that's why this is becoming incredibly hard to do. So to me, the first tenet that I want to suggest to you, that today, markets have changed. Things that made sense 25 years ago, they don't make sense today. And the biggest one is trying to pick individual stocks. It is too competitive, too much information, it moves too fast. And 20 years ago, I lived close by here. Luckily for me, this is my shortest commute ever to an event. There was, on the corner of Westwood and Olympic, 25 years ago, there was a Hollywood video, a Blockbuster video. You remember that? You remember that? Now it's a Chase Bank. I used to walk down with my kid, rent a VHS tape, for the folks who remember what it is. We would pop in the VCR, take it back a week later, pay the late fees, get another one. That made a lot of sense back in the 1990s. But Blockbuster Video, in the age of Netflix and Disney Plus, doesn't make as much sense. It's okay for the world to move on. And the world has moved on from individual stock picking. And the one way that I can show you from data, because everything that I want to do is data driven, the one way I show you is by looking at these managers. So there are a lot of managers out in the world, and when you look to see how did these managers do over, let's say, a 10-year period, they each have a yardstick, and you look at these 3,000 plus funds that had a 10-year track record. How many of these funds do you think they actually survived the 10 years? Made it through the 10 years? So you're an investor, you pick some of these funds. Well, suspense is killing everybody. It turns out that about a third of them, more than a third of them, actually disappeared. They're no longer in existence 10 years out. So you pick the fund, by the time 10 years comes, it's no longer there. And out of the ones that survived, how many of them do you think actually outperformed the yardstick, the benchmark to which they were pinned against? Only about 23%, fewer than 1 in 4. Meaning that if you're an investor and you go try to pick a fund that promises you they're going to pick the right stocks, there are 3 in 4 chances that you're going to pick a loser. Your odds are against you. Your totally odds are against you. And the idea is, well, what if you give them more time and you give now 15 years instead of 10 years? Does that get better or worse? It gets worse. Now it's 1 in 5 that outperform. And if you go to 20 years, which is most likely what a lot of everybody in this room has, you're looking at fewer than 1 in 5 will outperform. So to me, this idea that in order to be a successful investor, you need to be able to pick the right stock or pick the right manager is outdated. It's Blockbuster Video. By the way, there's still one in Bend, Oregon. You can pay $50 and get a card just for the novelty of it, so if you ever travel that way. But to me, that's a fundamental premise of markets working. Don't pick stocks unless you do it for fun. If you do it for fun the same way that you place a gamble in Vegas, great. But otherwise, don't do it because the odds are against you. The second premise is that sometimes the things are very obvious, and it's not just at the stock level, but at the stock market level. So you can look at the entire market and make some assessments. And I'm going to take 2 current events and try to make this point that trying to predict the market is as futile as trying to predict a stock. The first one is probably the biggest news that we hear every day, which is the war in Ukraine. Right? I mean, first of all, it's very emotional. It pisses me off. It makes me sad and angry and all these emotions because of all the suffering. And I'm not here to talk about that. It's more the pragmatic look at the market and how it fits in this idea that information travels and it's not really productive to think that one element like the war will lead to the market going up or down. And it hit me because we all are feeling the pain of the invasion at the pump. It's almost $7 a gallon. I mean, it's just crazy how expensive gas is. But the thing is, the stock market is not about the economy and what's going on right now. The stock market is about ownership in any company, and the value of the ownership, what does it depend on? How many of you are business owners? There gotta be some. What's the value of your business mostly tied to? If you want to sell your business today, sales. And what money will you make down the road? Not just this year, a year, 2 or 3. That's how any company's valued. It's not any different in the stock market. So the basic question that the markets have asked is, how is the war in Ukraine impacting corporate profits? It's a very cold question, but that's exactly what the market's been trying to answer. And what do you think the answer has been? Not that much. And here's a way to think about it. If you look between January 1st and the 23rd of February, which is the day before the invasion, The market by then was already down 11 to 12%. By the time the invasion began, between the day of the invasion, for the first 5 weeks to the end of the first quarter, the market actually went up 7% during the war. And this is crazy because I thought, like, how can it be? But it turns out that what's the impact on Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook of this war? You tell me. Even McDonald's and Coca-Cola, they only had 2 or 3% of their sales coming from that part of the world, so not as much. The other one is that somebody asked me a few weeks ago, well, what if we end up going into some sort of a Cold War or a nuclear war? If it was a nuclear war, my first thought was like, you know, I'm not sure that allocation to stocks is your primary concern at that point. But let's say that we go into some sort of a Cold War. And what's going to happen then? Because we have different priorities in the country, we have this little proxy fight with Russia. What's going to happen then? And I was curious to figure out, what did the market do during the Cold War that we already had? We have an example to look at. So if you look at the S&P 500, which is a broad measure of the US market, the largest fund of stocks in the US, and you look at the Cold War time, which was between, you know, most historians would say March of 48 to December of 91 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And you look on an annualized basis over this entire period, how did the stock market do? Well, let's start with the baseline. On average, over the long run, the US stock market had delivered returns to investors of about 10%. That's the long-term average of the market. Do you how much higher or lower do you think the market did during the Cold War? All these years, you have 40 plus years in the Cold War. Was it higher or lower? Higher. In fact, it was 12.7%. 12.7%, even though we had the Cuban Missile Crisis and all the nuttiness in the world, the market did a really good job. And the question is why? Why did the market do so well? Because these companies will figure out a way to make money in whatever state of the world we may be. But then, you know, obviously we won the Cold War. Now it's everybody's happy, and you know, we globalization, everybody's holding hands and singing Kumbaya. What do you think the market did between 92 and the end of last year, more or less? Because this is basically the time when we won. More. 10.6%, which is pretty much the long-term average. Less than the Cold War. So I'm not saying root for the Cold War because the market might be doing better. That's not what I'm saying. But it is interesting that even in a time when we had something like the Cold War, it did not spell doom and gloom. For our parents' generation, what do you think the darkest days are? The Second World War. Would you agree with that? Second World War is the darkest day. We had millions of people dying. We had the Holocaust. We had all these incredible bad things happening. And what's amazing is $1 invested on September 1st, 1939, when the war began, to the end of the war in 1945, at the end of August, $1 would have doubled during World War II. In every single year of war, when the US was involved, 42, 43, 44, 45, every single year the market went up significantly those years. So I wouldn't get carried away and say, oh, the war in Ukraine or some bigger issue is necessarily going to lead to doom and gloom in the market. Don't listen to that, because the evidence is not suggesting that. What's the other big news that you hear today? It's about the Fed raising rates. Have you heard that enough? The Fed's raising rates, and it's going to be horrific, that the market's been propped up by these low rates. Now the rates are going to go up, and it's going to be a bloodbath in the market. Have you heard that enough? Are you hearing on the news? I heard it enough. That kind of prompted me to look to see what is the evidence, because evidence-based investing means that you look at numbers. So what's the evidence? So this is what we looked at. When you look at the federal funds rate, which is the one rate that the Fed controls. The Fed is the central bank of the US. And right now there are hundreds of interest rates. There's a mortgage rate, there's a rate on a 1-year government bond, a 5-year government bond, corporate bonds. There are hundreds of interest rates, but this is the one that everybody focuses on. And this is what it looked like for the last 20 plus years, this century. And the reason I bring this up is not to kind of, blow you away, but really visually, can you see two periods when the rate was going up, similar to what is expected to happen this time around? Visually, do you see two rising rate periods? Of course, the first one is here, and this is 04 to 06. 3 years in a row, the Fed raised rates, and they went up significantly, about 4.5 times. And the second one is 2016 to 2018. Another 3 years of rising rates. So you now have 2 periods to look and ask the question, when the rates are going up, what's going to happen in the market? How bad does it get for the market? What do you think? For the first period, how many of the 3 years in the first period the market went down because of these rising rates, which is exactly what you hear on the news? Not a single year. In 2004, it was up about 10.9%. The numbers are small, but I can read them to you. In 2005, about 5%, 4.9%, and in 2006, about 15.8%. In every single year of these rising rates, it went up. And the second time we had this, once again, you had in 2016, markets are up about 20%, 21+% in 17, and then 18 we had a negative year. Why am I saying this? Because what you hear in the news so often, when you confront it with data, when you look at the evidence, it's not exactly what it seems. So when you hear that interest rates are going up and that's going to be terrible for the stock market, the evidence doesn't quite suggest that. And because of this, the one big lesson from this is, first of all, don't engage in stock picking, and second, realize that the stock market is driven by so many variables that not any one thing is going to drive it. So don't ever make a move with your money because of what just happened right now. The markets are not really driven so easily by what you hear on the news. And I've seen enough investors who are getting hurt because they react to what's going on in the news at the moment. So don't do that. Please don't do that. It's not a very smart thing to do. So that's the first lesson. Markets work. Instead of engaging in stock picking and market timing, you're better off staying more disciplined and believe in the power of markets. The second big concept there is that, and this is a really important one, that in life, not just in investing, risk and return are related. I mean, would you agree that in everyday life, that's sort of like how it works? Risk and return related. There's nothing different in the investment world. Risk and return are related. And the best way to see this is to look at the 2 main categories of investments that all of us have available. The first one is the stock market, which means you're buying ownership in companies. I couldn't buy ownership in your company, but I could go buy ownership in Apple, Google, Microsoft, all these companies that have opened up their ownership to anybody. And we can be part owners in the company. And the reason you want that is because you partake in the profits that the company makes. And that's beautiful because you can make a lot of money. The trouble is that profits fluctuate, and so does the value of any company. That's why the stock market fluctuates, because profits go up and down. That's the fundamental premise. But there's a second thing that you can do with your money. Instead of buying ownership, you can lend your money. Not to a real estate. You could do real estate, but reality, probably the most effective way to lend money is to look at corporations and governments who want to borrow from you, and they put up a contract that specifies that you will get a certain amount of interest on your money for a specified period of time, and at the back end, you get your money back. That is called a bond. A bond is nothing more than a form of lending. And the big difference is that in stocks, you have no idea what you're going to get. But in bonds, that interest rate is specified in a contract. You can take that company to bankruptcy if they don't pay you back. So there's a big difference between ownership and lending. And that is the difference between stocks and bonds. And I got to tell you folks, the most fundamental difference in investing, the most important decision that all of you have to make in investing is what is the split between your portion allocated to ownership, to stocks, versus bonds. It's the most important decision that all of you have to make. There's a big trade-off. And let's just take a very clean example of why that's the case. If you look at the stock market over the long run, there's data. We have this book that's one of my favorites. If anybody wants it, just talk to Selwyn or Jonathan or Stefan and we'll get you a copy. It's a big book of investment data. And it turns out that it goes back to 1926. If you go back to 1926 and you had invested $1 single in the stock market in the S&P 500, any guesses what that dollar would have grown to?
$10,000.
$10,000, very close. Actually, Stefan, I think it's on page 17 What's the growth of a $1 in the S&P 500? Because I don't know exactly the number, but it can't be that far.
$11,000 through 2020. So
$11,000. One single dollar turns into 11,000 at an average of about 10%. But instead of that, because it fluctuates a lot, you could have put the money into probably the safest investment that a lot of people consider to be, which is give it to the government. You get your money back after 30 days plus interest. That is called a 30-day treasury bill. And that earned investors something in the order of 3-4% per year on average. Now, if you had invested the same dollar over the same time period in the safety of these treasury bills that generally move very little in value, what do you think the $10,000 would have become? So you grow your money at 3-4% rather than 10%. What's the $10,000 become? $600? Do I hear $700? I think it's on page 61. It's a dollar growth in the treasury bills over the long run. The same dollar, same time frame.
$22.
$22. It's not missing any zero. It's $22. That's why the difference between stocks and bonds, that's why this decision is the most important decision in your allocation. It's not what stocks you buy, it's what's the mix between stocks and bonds. And generally speaking, if you are a more conservative investor, if you are in retirement, you don't have a lot of other assets coming in, then you want to be more on the safer side of bonds, more asset preservation, what it's called, and less in stocks. But you still have to have some stocks. And to see what's interesting is that the stocks and the bonds, the big difference of that is about risk. And the risk is how much they can fluctuate in value. So if you look at the stock market and you take the S&P 500 and you look over the long run and you ask over any 12 months period, what's the lowest and the highest 12 months you could have seen in your account? And I know these are small numbers, so I'm going to read them to you. The best outcome that you would have had over 12 months in the stock market is that your money would have gone up 53%. That's the best outcome. 53% in 12 months in the stock market. On the worst side, it would have been a drop of 43%. You would have lost 43% of your money in 12 months. That's the stock market. But now, if you look at all the bonds in the U.S., like you put them all together, all the bonds, the same way that you put all the stocks, you put all the bonds in one package, this is what the outcome for bonds would have been. Over 12 months, the worst, the best you would have seen was 18%, but the worst, instead of negative 43, it would have been a negative 4.5%. That's the worst. The biggest difference between stocks and bonds is the level, the magnitude of the movement, the magnitude of potential losses. Bonds are a lot less. If you care about risk at all, you have to pay attention to bonds because the magnitude of the movement of bonds is a lot lower than it is of stocks. And there's one thing, the more you give the system time to work, the better the outcomes. So if you look at, instead of 1 year, you look at 5 years, what you see here is that the range of outcomes shrink. This is on an annualized basis over 5 years. There's not a single time when you would have lost money in bonds. The worst it would have been is 0.7% up. And if you go to 10 years, once again, you still have negative in stocks, but nothing in bonds. That's why I'm suggesting to you folks, the most important decision is stocks versus bonds. It's the risk and return relationship, but you make a lot more money in stocks than you make in bonds. That's just the reality. And to really highlight this, this book, again, it's a fantastic book, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but there's, in the back of this book, there are some model portfolios that switch from all bonds to all stocks. And I do want to draw your attention on these because that relationship between risk and return, it is so obvious to me if you look at the gradual shift from moving from bonds to stocks. So if you take a portfolio that's 100% made out of bonds, and this is all bonds, so it's 100% fixed income, these are bonds, no stocks at all. Look at the first number, and this probably is too small, but I'll read it to you. What's the lowest 1 year return? The lowest outcome that you'd have had over 12 months. Can you see it? You would have lost 1.3%. And this is going back to 85. But over the time frame, if you look at 100%, that you would have had a negative 1.8 loss, but $1 would have grown to more than $6. Six-fold increase, with the worst outcome being a 1% loss. What if you actually now put 20% in stocks? If you put 20% in stocks and you still have 80% in bonds, the worst 12 months would have been a negative 11%. So you move from almost a break even at the worst, now the worst would have been the 11%. But look what happened to the growth of the same dollar. What is it now? 11.4. You went from 6 to 11.4. What do you think is going to happen if you add another 20% in stocks? Now you have 40% in stocks. The worst would have been negative 20% plus. But look again, what's the growth of a dollar? Every time you add more money in stocks, two things happen. The worst case scenario gets worse and worse, whereas 100% stocks, there was a time when you could have lost 47% of your money, but when you look at the outcome in terms of what you make, you go from $6 all the way to $47. And the question is, what do you think you should be? Among all these folks in the room, what do you think you should be among the spectrum of stocks and bonds? What do you think the right number is for you? I'm sorry? 50-50. It's a trick question, but thanks, right? The trick question is, it depends. It depends. That's why you need RFW to have a financial plan, to look at your account and see for your lifestyle, for what do you have, for your risk capacity, all these considerations that get put into this plan. And only when you have that plan and somebody understands your circumstances can they tell you that's the right amount for you. For some of you, you're absolutely right, 50-50 might be the right one, because even if you retire, let me tell you folks, most people who retire, they have another 35, 40 years to plan. It's not like you retire and the next day you go, no, you have 40 years to plan. And if you become too conservative, that might not be right either. So that's why I cannot tell you there's one single right allocation. It's so custom to your needs. But this is what you have to take account for. What is the relationship between risk and return? That's the biggest thing that you should consider in investing. Okay, so we talked about markets working, we talked about risk and return. The third element of it is the type of research that people do. And it turns out that what you're going to get in your portfolio, it's not quite as random as it might seem. And there is a structure, and by the way, one little quick note before I move this on. I did look at this, and it didn't strike me at first, but the importance of discipline and an advisor. I had so many people in 08, 09. You remember those days? It seems like a lifetime ago, but in 08, 09, the market tanked significantly. And a lot of people just bailed out because they said, I cannot take this anymore. I'm so emotional about this, I need to get out. And what was fascinating to me was that when I zoomed in, and I looked at what was the worst period for stocks. Well, it was negative 47%. This is a global portfolio allocation. And it started in March 08, and it ended in February 09. That was the worst stretch for the stock market going back to 85. The best one was 67%. When did the best stretch for the stock market begin? The month after. The month after. So for people who decide, I'm kind of fed up with the market, it dropped, I need to get out. Look at this. The worst period is followed by the best. And you need to have an advisor because in those times it's so natural to feel like I need to get out of this. You want to be disciplined, and that's a huge, I can't tell you how many advisors and how many clients thank their advisors for keeping them disciplined in this. Okay, so we talked about markets work, risk and return are related. The next one is basically how do you think then about structuring the stocks? Because I kind of told you that markets do what they do, you can't really control them, don't pick stocks, but it doesn't mean it's hopeless. Over the past 50 years or so, there has been a lot of research in the stock market. And I'm going to tell you that the difference is that instead of looking at researching individual companies, the difference has been a research that is much more robust. And I was trying to explain the difference between this type of research to my mother-in-law. And she's an awesome person, but she's more visual. And the one thing that helped her and helped me was one time I was in Santa Barbara at the harbor. Brophy Brothers, great little fish place. And we were sitting there with my kids. And right in front of us, there was a seal chasing a school of fish. And it was kind of fun to watch. But what it hit me is this, is that as you watch, you could not really predict how each fish is going to move. You know, the school of fish is kind of like every fish is moving quite random. But after you watch that for a while, you start to capture and understand the behavior of the entire school of fish with a lot more precision than you can any one fish. And that's the difference that I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to research individual companies. I'm going to look at much larger baskets of stocks, and this is called asset class investing. You should all know this. Asset class investing is about schools of fish, not individual companies. And if you do this, the challenge has been, how do you organize all these companies in the market? And traditionally it was about sectors, like pharmaceutical, transportation, energy. It turns out that that's a secondary consideration. But the primary drivers of market returns can actually be organized a little bit differently. And you start with the entire stock market. And so let's say these are all the stocks in the market. How do you organize them? And in the late 70s and early 80s, the very first research came along suggesting that one intuition that has economic theory behind it and data is to organize companies based on their size. And you have these really large companies that are all part of the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones, but there are about 2,000 other smaller companies that are not part of the stock market. If you want to get a burger, you can get McDonald's, which is a very large company, but as you know, in Century City, there's also a Shake Shack. Those are both publicly traded burger companies. One is large, one is small. Do you think that both of them have the same capacity and potential for growth? Who do you think would be easier to grow and double in size, McDonald's or Shake Shack? Shake Shack, of course. But on the other hand, which one is more mature, robust, better track record? You know, where it's like maybe a little bit less risk in a way, less uncertainty. McDonald's, right? So intuitively, the two of them are different. You can't put them in the same basket. Smaller companies, they carry perhaps more uncertainty, but also more potential for growth. And in the late 80s and early 90s, one more categorization was made, which is something that's known today as value growth. And value growth is simply asking the question, how much are you paying to own something? If you want to buy an apartment here or a house in West LA, you can either pay $400 a square foot on a house, but maybe down the street there's another one for $800 a square foot. If you want to buy these to make money, which one would give you a better chance to make money? The lower cost one or the higher cost one? Lower cost. Value stocks tend to be the lower cost. So when you combine these two, it turns out that these two give you two out of the main considerations when it comes to investing. What is the size of the company? That's what you should pay attention to. Smaller companies behave differently than large. And the second one, what is the relative price at which you buy companies? And their third one that emerged not too long ago looks at profitability. Are these companies profitable or unprofitable? And it turns out that the more profitable companies, again, they have a different characteristics for investor than the investors than the low profitability. So let's put some numbers very quickly. If you look at the difference between large and small, this would be the S&P 500. These would be the large companies. That's the S&P 500. That's what everybody watches on the news. These are smaller companies which are not part of the S&P. Smaller companies have delivered to investors about 12%, 11.9% over the long run. The S&P, 10%. If you wanted to beat the S&P, if you wanted to do better than the S&P, is there a way to do that without picking stocks? But beyond index fund, what else can you do? If the S&P is the large companies, if you want to do better, what can you do? Pay attention to small companies. Exactly right. Don't put all the money into large. Put some money into small. Consider small. And then we have the relative price. When you look at value stocks relative to growth, you see another huge difference. That's a big difference. If you look at small and value, it's actually even greater than this. Together, that's about 13%. So about 3% more per year on average than the S&P. And then we also have the profitability, which is 11.9. So in other words, what I'm saying is that investor, you can be very purposeful. You can say, okay, I don't need to pick stocks, but if I want to give myself a chance to earn higher expect returns, what can you do? Put more money into smaller companies. They have relatively low price. and they have a higher profitability. That actually gives you a chance to earn higher returns. And that to me is the system that I've been talking about. It's just it's an incredibly powerful system that you can use to deploy money. Buy large baskets of stocks and then just emphasize different asset classes. But what's the risk there? Because I can tell you can make more money. What's the risk? I'm sorry? Downside. It turns out that in this case, it's a bit of a funky risk. It's not necessarily a downside. The difference in downside between large, small value growth, particularly when you combine them, it's not that great. The biggest risk to me, and the reason that more people don't do this, is because you need to have an advisor who understands the system and can manage your expectations. The biggest risk to me is behavioral. If you saw these numbers and you kind of buy into this, and a quarter from now you go meet with Selwyn or Jonathan or Stefan and you ask them, hey, how did the market do? How did stocks do? And they tell you, well, this quarter, large actually beat small. How would you feel?
Let's go to
Bummed out. You give it another quarter. What do you feel then? Didn't work out. You're not feeling great. Thing is that this whole system is not about certainty or guarantees, but it's pretty much like everything in life. It's about managing odds, statistics, and probabilities. That's what this whole system is about. How many of you have tried to work out, eat healthier? I have. I mean, actually, I have a swim buddy here that I didn't even know. It turns out that I like to eat healthy and work out and try to keep a healthy lifestyle. Does that guarantee me a longer lasting, healthier life? Does it guarantee to any of us? No, but what does it do? Increases the odds. This is all about odds. So when you think in that respect, over 1 year, let's just take value versus growth. Over 1 year, about 60% of the time, 59% of the time, value will beat growth. But what's the flip side? 4 in 10 years is not going to be there. You'll be disappointed. What if you give it 5 years and say, Selma, I'll give you 5 years? In that case, about 70% of the time, it will happen, 30% you won't be there. Will you be able to understand that even though we're going through a 5-year period, the odds are still better for you to stick with that plan? The problem is that a lot of investors, when they get to that point, they said, I'm done with this. This didn't work, I'm done, I'm bailing out. And that's the problem. The problem is not having an advisor who can manage your expectations. And even if you give it 10 years, your odds are better, but not 100%. But let me ask you this, if you have a 5 or a 10-year horizon and you saw these odds, which part of the market would you like to emphasize? Value, but you will be disappointed at times. And that's the thing. That's why you need to have an advisor who really, at the time when he feels like this is hopeless, not necessarily going to bail out of the system at the wrong time. So that's the structure determines performance. And the last thing that I want to touch on is another piece that I think is huge, which is you need to diversify. Today, we live in a global world. And in fact, if you look at the stock market, and you look at a global map, and instead of plotting landmass, you're going to plot the value of all companies that you can buy and sell around the world. This is what the map will look like. The US, when you add up about 3,000 plus companies that you can buy and sell, it amounts to a little over 55%. 57% of the value of all companies in the world are traded in the US. Which means there are 12,000 plus companies abroad that are not part of the US. And what I think all of us should do is consider not just investing in the US, but have a global perspective to investing. And just a quick note, if you drive down the street here, you're going to see some Ford and GMs and Teslas. American-made cars. So it absolutely makes sense to invest in the US. But what else are you going to see? How many of you drive a German car? Or a Japanese car? Or a British car? Or even, Jaguar and Land Rover? Those are brands owned by an Indian company. You have to buy that company in India. Jeep and Chrysler, it's owned by an Italian company that you have to trade in Milan. The point is that today you want to have a global perspective. And there are going to be times that the US is going to do really well. Over the past 10 years or so, the US has shut the lights out. And everybody's saying, well, let's just put more money in the US. The yellow bar, I know this is, if anybody can read that, then God bless. No, I can read that. But the yellow line is the US. second best performing country over the past decade to 2010 to 2020 after New Zealand. But the thing is, when people get so enamored of the US being the best performer, just look one decade before that, and the US in yellow was towards the bottom here. Nobody was asking, let's put more money in the US when the US was doing terribly. You need to have this global perspective. And in fact, if you look over decades, year after year, and you look at these average annualized over decades between international and US, you see there are decades when the US is actually underperforming. There are decades when it does better than international, but by and large, when you look at these decades, is it obvious that the US consistently does better than international? Not really. So ultimately, what am I here to suggest? What's the underpinning of the systematic or evidence-based investing that Selwyn talked about? There are 4 elements to this, and I'm going to put them all together. The first one is that don't try to predict markets or try to predict individual stocks. It's not what it used to be. Secondly, is that your allocation between stocks and bonds, the relationship between risk and return, is probably the most important decision that you can make. Thirdly, is that you can control your performance by the structure and your allocation to large versus small, value versus growth, and highly profitable versus unhighly profitable. And fourth, just round up the portfolio with international stocks. Don't just put all your money in the US. Those are the 4 elements. And I'm going to try to put them all together into some sort of an outcome. Again, looking at the Matrix book, and again, it's such a phenomenal book. There are a lot of numbers. I'm not going to ask you to read all of them. But if you look at this and you compare what would happen if you put the money into an S&P, which is the US market, which is investing at the most basic thing. And you say, okay, I'm going to put the money into the S&P, and what you see there is that's one thing you can do. The other one, you can say, I'm going to have the S&P, but in the sample model that I'm going to show you, I'm not just going to have the S&P stocks. I'm going to put some international stocks, I'm going to put some small stocks, and I'm also going to put 40% in bonds. 40% in bonds. So the question is, if you're now looking at this allocation, the US stock market relative to this allocation that is very balanced and globally diversified, what's the difference? Is it better or worse for you as an investor? And if you look over the past 20 plus years, this is what you see. On average per year over the past 21, 22 years, the S&P was up about 7.5%. And the measure of volatility and the movement is called standard deviation, and it was 15. The larger the number, the greater the fluctuation in value. So I kind of shared with you already that you can actually do better than the S&P just simply by buying the smaller companies' value, profitability. So the question here is not necessarily how much better can you outperform the market. You can put the shoe on the other foot and say, can I accomplish similar results with less risk, less volatility? And this is what the data shows. If you are actually in this model portfolio, which is just a very basic generic model portfolio that's in the back of the book, what you see is that you pretty much get the same exact return over the same time period. But what's the difference between these two allocations? Less risk, exactly right, in terms of volatility. So you can accomplish the same results, but just with less risk. But again, the big risk here, to me, it's behavioral. And the way you see that is like, boy, they have exactly the same results. But when you have your quarterly meetings or your annual meetings, what you're going to see is that about 64% of the time, the S&P would outperform that balanced 60-40. So if you're in that year, could you stick with it? Could you say, I know that this is going to happen, and I'm going to stick with it? That's the biggest question. Because there are going to be years of significant underperformance. The S&P would up 32%, your portfolio only 15%. Can also go the other way. But that, to me, is the biggest risk associated with investing, the behavior risk. One of my favorite sayings that an advisor had a while ago is that I don't have people with investment problems. I have investments with people problems. which is true because so much of it is the investor behavior that is standing in our way of getting these results. So that's pretty much what I wanted to kind of cover is the system of investing that's not on the news, but it's so much more powerful. And I do think it's backed by a lot of rigorous research and data rather than intuition and hunches.
Thank you to Apollo. Apollo, superstar. Thank you. Clear, comprehensible, thorough, data-based. I didn't tell you enough about Dimensional, by the way, before I also didn't tell you enough about Steve Siegel. Just so you know, the people who inspire and inform the Dimensional strategies are basically Nobel Prize winners. I don't say that enough. But if you go and look at who won the Nobel Prize winners, prizes for economics, you'll be looking at Eugene Fama, who's their chief advisor, and Merton and others. There's a whole list of prominent academics and Nobel Prize winners. So when they say data-driven, they really mean it. Secondly, for those of you who are interested in that and other ideas on investing, my son and I wrote a book. The date is a little bit outdated, but as you can tell, these wisdom pearls are perennial. I will confess there's nothing original in this book at all. It was never intended to be some original treatise by my son and I on some unique investment philosophies. Instead, we put it together a Reader's Digest of the best thinking, and that's really what our approach is at RVW. Find the best thinking and embrace it. So thanks again to Apollo. Steve Siegel is a lawyer's lawyer, as I said. He's written a huge number of textbooks, published articles in important publications, spoken at the CCH, and for those of you who know what that is, great. Hemmerling Institute, if you know what that is, great. If you don't, just trust me, these are the most respected institutions. He flies around the country lecturing to lawyers and financial specialists on advanced planning strategies. Many lawyers around the country use him to opt him in, to assist in the planning process when matters get complex and to oversee the final details. So he's a lawyer's lawyer. He comes from New Jersey, we flew him out especially to be with us today, and we're deeply honored that in his busy schedule he managed to find some time to share with the RVW team. So Steve, it's a great pleasure to welcome you, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Solomon, and it's a pleasure to be here. Well, you heard from Apollo the best ways to increase your wealth. Now I'm going to tell you about the best ways not to lose it. There are two things that stand in your way to increase wealth significantly. One is failure to plan, and the other, sadly, is the government. And so what we're going to talk about is how we address these issues, that what is really important here. One of the things that you need to do, we all need to do, and I know as I've been introduced to some of the attendees here, we've got attorneys, we've got CPAs, we've got people in the real estate world and other investment areas. All of us can have conversations with our clients. We don't have to be expert to have those conversations. If necessary, we can refer people to our local experts. I'm from New Jersey. I don't practice law in California, but I know many of your California lawyers because I've spoken here a number of times. There are wonderful lawyers here who understand this, but there needs to be conversations to get the process started. One of the things that everyone should be thinking about is the pandemic showed us and continues to show us that there has been a terrible failure of planning, that we've had a situation where people died unexpectedly. They didn't wait till their old age when they would have done some planning, thinking, I have to make my children or heirs ready for me to pass. People passed unexpectedly and prematurely. As a result, in addition to the sadness of losing a loved one, we had the additional issue of them not doing any planning, and now the law gets in the way. They don't have wills, they don't have trusts, they haven't figured out what to do. So everybody should be thinking about planning. You need a will, you need a trust, you need basic documents. This doesn't have to be your wealthiest clients. This is for everyone. There is a level of sophistication beyond the average client that we'll talk about. But for every client, planning is essential. Do you have what's called a durable power of attorney? Should you become ill or incapacitated, someone can act on your behalf. You need a document that says that. Appoint the proper person so that should something happen to you, you have the security of knowing that your world will not suddenly stop. If you become ill and you're hospitalized and you're under doctor's care, do you have a document called a living will, a healthcare proxy? Not that we ever want to be in that situation, but maybe we want to have a family member, a close person, a loved one who is instructed to tell doctors and hospitals what our wishes are. Do we want to be preserved forever, no matter how awful we may be in health, or do we want to be preserved from suffering, pain and suffering, but not kept alive artificially forever? These are things that law lets us do. If we fail to do it, the law isn't very favorable. The law has presumptions that aren't the ones that we want to look at. When was the last time you and your clients looked at your estate planning documents? Who is your executor, your trustee? Who are your successors? People's lives change at various times in your life. People might pick their parents as guardians of their young children. Well, your children become teenagers. Your parents are now 70. Do you want a 70-year-old parent chasing a 14 or 15-year-old around? Especially in today's world, where it's a lot different than people who grew up and now in their 40s or 50s. So you have these issues that can be looked at. Who's your life insurance beneficiary? Who's your retirement plan beneficiary? If your client got divorced somewhere along the way, is their ex-spouse still the beneficiary of the retirement plan? There are US Supreme Court cases that say whoever's the person named in your plan, that's who gets the money. Even if in a matrimonial agreement the spouse said, I waive all my rights. If you're still named in the plan, the US Supreme Court says named person gets the money. So these are things to be looking at. Another thing that I see a lot, clients come to me and they show me their will and their trust. And it was written 1999. And they say, well, I haven't had to change it in 20 plus years. I say, why? Well, nothing's changed. I have the same spouse, the same kids, we get along, my family's fine. And I read the document, and there's a paragraph in there that says, upon my death, I leave the maximum amount that can pass without federal estate tax to my children, the balance to my spouse. Well, in 1999, that was $675,000 to the children, the balance to the spouse. In 2022, it's $12.06 million to the children, the balance to the spouse. And if the spouse is sitting there saying, what balance? We don't have $12 million. The kids look at everything. And I say, that's what your document says. So people need to be thinking about basic planning issues, even if they're not your most wealthy and sophisticated clients. What's happening in 2022? Well, the BBB, the Build Back Better, is on the baby, the back burner right now. Or has it been? We thought it was. We thought at the end of 21 it had not passed, and they were going to leave us alone for a year. It's an election year. They tend not to make new tax laws in election years. But just recently, we have a new proposal. We have the 2023 fiscal proposals, which brings back much of the BBB and adds some new provisions, all of which would require wealthier clients to pay a lot more money in taxes. So now we're back on this roller coaster that we were on last year. I'm sure many of you experienced for yourselves or your clients or both, people last year, your attorneys, your accountants saying, oh, you got to do all this planning because they're going to take away all these great opportunities we've had for the last 30 or 40 years, and we've only got to the end of the year to fix it. And they kept moving the goalposts. That's the way I like to refer to it. They keep changing the proposals of what the tax law will be, and we as planners have to say to clients, I need to tell you that as of a certain date or a certain time, all this is going to change, all this is going to go away, and you're going to be sorry if you don't plan. Well, people ran around. I have colleagues that I know, that fellow speakers, their hair was on fire, the sky was falling, they couldn't do enough programs and speak to enough clients to get things to change. And the clients who listened ended up with planning fatigue. Every month they were being told, change this, change that, rewrite this, let me amend that, and people don't like to pay for that. Forgetting whether you need to do it or not, clients don't want to be told every 3 months by their CPAs and their tax lawyers, we have to change all your documents. It gets expensive. And they begin to say, when's it going to change next? Can we skip this change till we get to the next change? So where are we now? There's a concern that if they can't pass it by statute, maybe they'll issue regulations. Well, none of this is happy news. This is not a political statement. This is a tax planner statement. You may think that raising taxes is the best idea in the world, capture more money from wealthy people, that's your decision. But my role as a tax planner and an advisor is to keep taxes as low as possible, let clients enjoy as much of their wealth as they possibly can. One of the scary things is you might see people occasionally talk about retroactivity. What they say is, well, if we pass a law in April or May, we can make it retroactive to January 1st of the year. And that's a little scary because people die in January, February, March, April, and the family thinks they have a certain level of exclusion available. What if they go back and say, oh, we're going to make it a lot lower? The longer they wait, the more difficult that becomes. But can the law be made retroactive? The answer is yes. There's several U.S. Supreme Court cases that you'll see on the slide that say, yes, if there's a legitimate legislative purpose, whatever that means, they can make tax laws retroactive. That doesn't mean they're going to be. A lot of the proposals that we'll look at are talked about becoming effective on, quote, the date of enactment. What does that mean? That's the date that's signed by the president. So they could pass a law this morning and rush it through Congress, get both houses to accept it, hand it to the president, signs the bill, it's effective today. It doesn't usually work that well or that quickly, fortunately, but it could be effective a lot sooner than January 1 of 2023, which would give us time to plan. So these are just things to be thinking about. So how scary are we in this position? The good news is we have the most generous exemption from transfer tax that we've ever had in the history of transfer taxes. $12,060,000 per person. So a married couple, $24.12 million can be left without estate tax, without gift tax. So that is a tremendous opportunity. There are many clients who are well below those numbers. There are some who are, fortunately for them, well over those numbers. But this is the way we want to look at this. This is not here forever. Even if nothing changes under the current administration, the tax law says at the end of 2025, the 17 Act, what was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed under the Trump administration, that act sunsets, it disappears. And January 1 of 26, the exemption goes down to 5 million index for inflation since 2018, so it'll be 6 million, 7 million, somewhere in that range. Not 12 million. So instead of 24 million, people will be able to pass 12 to 14 million. Again, for many, that's nowhere near, it's way above their wealth, they have no concerns. But for others, it's, oh, that's a different number, I need to be thinking about that. The Biden plan said 5 million, starting indexing next year. The Sanders plan, Senator Sanders wanted 3.5 million. He wanted 3.5 million at death, 1 million from gift time during life. That doesn't seem to have gained traction, but we have to keep an eye on it. So what I say to clients is, look, this could be the last year, the last opportunity to make significant gifts. And so this is part of what we want to talk to clients about. We have this opportunity. We can make gifts to whoever we wish, and we have the $12 million opportunity. We can make gifts to grandchildren or other, what we call skip persons, 2 generations younger than the person who makes the transfer, typically grandchildren. And we have a generation skipping tax. It's an extra separate tax from the gift and the estate taxes, but that also has a $12 million exclusion. It wouldn't shock me if a Congress decided at some point that's too generous to leave to grandchildren. We'll make that number a lot smaller. That could happen. Right now it hasn't happened. So another planning opportunity. The law says even if you use your big exclusion now and it goes down, whether by political action between now and 26 or the 26 sunset, whichever way that goes, there won't be clawback, meaning that if you gave away $12 million this year and they dropped it to 6 or 7 million in the future, they're not going to come back at you for that extra 5 or 6 million that you gave away. But if you do nothing and the law changes, you don't get a retroactive, well, you could have given away 12 and so we'll let you keep doing it. No, it's the year in which you make the gift or you die, that's when the number is going to be out there. So we have to be careful that we watch this situation. I recommend to a lot of clients, the wealthier clients, certainly, and even less wealthy clients, set up trusts. Set up trusts for your children and your grandchildren. People say, well, I want to give my grandchildren millions of dollars. You don't have to. You put the money in a trust. The trust can say for the lifetime of this child or grandchild, trustees have the discretion. Pay income, pay principal, don't pay income and principal. If the child is an appropriate inheritor, lives a healthy, good life, and doesn't get involved in addictions, whether they're gambling or drugs or alcohol or just being stupid or in a terrible marriage, if none of those things are happening, pass on the money. If any of those things are happening, hold it back. That way you're not forced. I had cases where a grandparent died and left a 25-year-old child $1 million trust fund that was payable at age 25, and the child was a heroin addict. And at 25, they went to court and said, I get the money. And they tried to get a guardian appointed saying, well, you're a heroin addict. The person says, no, I'm not, I'm fine. I mean, you don't want to have that situation. So this is planning that makes sense. Use the opportunities, but use them wisely. And these are the conversations we can have with our clients, regardless of whether we're the last person writing the document or just an advisor who says to the client, you know, I heard some talk about these things. Maybe this is something you should be thinking about. So that's where we have this opportunity. Now, I have clients that say, everything you say is wonderful, I agree with everything, but here's my problem. All my wealth is tied up in illiquid assets. I own a business that's valuable, I own real estate that's valuable, I don't have a lot of cash, so I really can't give away what you're thinking about. And I don't want to give away a minority piece of my business or my real estate. Well, I say, well, borrow the money. Interest rates have been going up, but they're not unbelievably high. Borrow the money and give away the cash. That way you've got plenty of collateral to allow the borrowing to work. That can make sense. So the people who are reluctant to give, we need to give them a little incentive and a reason to do that. Every year we can give $16,000 away to as many people as we want, and there's no tax consequence at all. That's called the annual exclusion from gift tax. It goes up by inflation, has to go up a full $1,000 before it hits the next level. It was $15,000 for 3 or 4 years. The way things are going, it will probably be $17,000 next year. But you're looking at these opportunities. Senator Sanders wanted to reduce this significantly. Other plans have suggested reducing it somewhat. So far, nothing's happened. It's not part of the Biden's most recent plan to reduce it, but who knows what will get passed, if anything, as they go on. So how do I hedge a gift problem? What I say is make a gift and put a provision in the gift saying the beneficiary can disclaim this gift, meaning that I'm giving it away, but the beneficiary has the option to decline it. And if the beneficiary declines it, you have 9 months to make that decision. That's the tax law. You have 9 months to make a disclaimer. Don't accept anything, just let it sit for 9 months if you're thinking about disclaiming. Why is that a good idea? Well, if they change the law and make it effective January 1 of 23, we have more than 9 months to get past January 1. So if we are worried that we're concerned that a gift will be highly taxed and they try to make it retroactive, the disclaimer makes the gift go away. I give money to my children disclaim it within the 9 months, I get it back. I didn't make a gift at all. That's how the tax law works. That's totally proper. That's what we can do. So another hedge against potential bad news. If you're making a gift to a trust for multiple children and or grandchildren, give a primary beneficiary, or what we call a trust protector. Name someone in the trust who has the right to say, I disclaim on behalf of everybody. So this way, we're being very flexible. We're kind of putting a foot in each camp. One camp says make the gifts, the other camp says if they change the law, we're going to be sorry. We got that covered if we go in that direction. One of the Biden proposals, if you make a gift of appreciated property, all the appreciation is taxable. So you bought a property for, let's say you bought Apple stock for $25 a share, and now it's $200 a share. that $175 of appreciation would be taxed when you make the gift. That's not the law today. So again, we're thinking of what we can do today. Here's a planning thought, and this is something that we've been recommending to a lot of clients. It doesn't work for community property. If you give away community property, each person is giving away half the property. So this works when you're dealing with separate property. This is my recommendation. Let's say you have a client who wants to make a $10 million gift to children, grandchildren, whomever. Normally what we do is we split the gift. I'm from a common law state where we have to elect to split a gift. Community property itself is automatically split, but separate property is not split. So I would have spouse A give away the whole $10 million. Don't split the gift with spouse B. That's what we normally think about. Don't do that now. A gives away $10 million to children or grandchildren. Okay, used up all of his or her exclusion. I'm assuming it's $10 million. I know it's a little over 12, but just for the discussion. B gives away nothing. What happens if they change the law and drop the exclusion to 5 or 6 million? Well, A is done. A gave away 10, no clawback, so A's good. B has given away nothing. B can give away another 5 or 6. If you had split that gift initially, A gave away 5 or 6, B gave away 5 or 6, they're done. The kid's got 10 or 12 million, no more free gift. In my thought, the kid's got 10 or 12 million from A and can get another 6 million from B. That's 16 million versus 10 million. That's $6 million at a 40% tax rate. You've just saved $2.4 million in transfer tax. That's not a foolish thing to be thinking about. So that's the planning that we want to think about. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, I like what you're saying, but what if B dies without making a gift? Your plan didn't work. I say, oh no, hold on, my plan did work. Why did it work? Because if B dies and leaves B's assets to A gets what's called portability. The unused exclusion of B when a person dies ports to their surviving spouse. So A gets B's unused exclusion. A now gets the 6 million exclusion that B could have used had B still lived. So now A can give away another 6 million, and we still got the kids 16 million. So this is planning that makes sense. This is not something the average client is going to think about doing. These are things that we can suggest. I mentioned portability. Portability means that if a person dies, their unused exclusion ports to their surviving spouse. It moves to the surviving spouse. So A and B are married. A leaves everything to B. A uses none of A's exclusion. B now has A's exclusion, 12.06 million, plus B's own exclusion. If B's exclusion stays high, great. If B's exclusion drops in the future because B's still alive to 5 or 6 million, B would have the 12 million from A plus B's own exclusion. So it could be 24 million, it could be 15, 16, who knows how many millions, but the 12 million is there. But to get portability, you have to do something. You have to file a federal estate tax return. That's Form 706. It's due 9 months after death. You can get an automatic extension of 6 months, so it's 15 months after death if you file the extension form. You don't need a reason to file the form, just file it. If you do that, just filing the form gives you portability. The form can be prepared in a simplified manner. This all works. And I recommend to so many people to do this. And they say, well, I'm not wealthy enough. I have $2 or $3 million, my spouse has $2 or $3 million, we're never going to be taxpayers, don't be so sure. Can anyone guarantee where the law is going to be in 10 or 20 years? We can't guarantee where it's going to be in 10 or 20 weeks. And if the law changes in the future, you might have a spouse A dies at age 70, spouse B lives to 95. Well, what's the law going to be when spouse B reaches 95? We have no clue. So the more we take advantage of opportunity, the more we're protecting ourselves against future bad news. And if there is no future bad news, great, then we still made the right call. So how do you get portability? As I said, you file that Form 706. It only applies when you have a married person who dies with a surviving spouse from 2011 or later. So a person died in 2005, too bad, no portability, the law wouldn't allow it then. 2011 or later. What if you didn't file a return on time? You had that 9 months, you didn't bother, you had another 6 if you got an extension, you still didn't bother. Now someone says to you, oh, you should have filed for portability. not too late. There's a revenue procedure. The government says, we'll give you 2 years from the date of the person's death to file the Form 706. You still get portability. Still works. Oh, great, people say. I love that. Okay. What if you missed that opportunity? You missed the 2 years. Now what happens? Well, you can get a private letter ruling. You can pay the government a user fee of $12,600 for the privilege of getting what you could have had for free if you acted in a timely manner. Well, you know, free is better than $12,600. And you're still going to have to pay someone to do the 706, and it shouldn't be that expensive. It's a simple state. It makes a lot of sense. My recommendation to people is, I call it death tax insurance. Think of all the insurance we pay for. We have life insurance, we have homeowners insurance, we have car insurance, we have an umbrella policy, we have contents insurance, and there's probably 5 other insurances I haven't thought about to mention. This is death tax insurance. If you die and your spouse dies, you get all this exclusion working for you. If you don't file the 706, you don't have that exclusion working for you. You don't have your own. And if they make it small, you might be a taxpayer. And right now the government is looking for 40%. Sanders' plan said raise them to 55. Biden's plan said raise them to 45 or 50. So when is enough enough? These are things we can be thinking about. The good news is, as we are speaking today, all the great planning techniques that we've been able to use in the last 20 or 30 years are still available. They've not taken any of these things away. So we can do all the things you see on the slide that we're looking at here. They haven't increased income tax rates. We still have a rule that says when you die, the fair market value of your assets becomes the basis to your heirs. That eliminates a lot of potential capital gain tax when you've had growth. Just sitting next to someone who said their home has increased in value by millions of dollars, having lived in Beverly Hills for 40 years. Well, if they tax that at death as opposed to not taxing it, that's a lot going on. So for now, they haven't changed that. Special techniques we call GRATs and IDGITs, really great sophisticated planning techniques. No change yet. The Biden plan would kill them, would eliminate them from being useful. They would literally make them unavailable because of the way they would change the law. For now, they're still available. The law still lets us do this. We still have relatively low interest rates. Keyword relatively. There's this code section that says this is the interest rate you have to use when you value an annuity. It's a code section that had the rate about a year ago of 1.2%. That was amazingly favorable. Now the rate for May is 3%. Still favorable. It was 5 and 6 20 years ago, but still favorable. So this is something that we want to be focusing on. We can still transfer a business interest to members of our family and take a discount. So I can give my kids 10, 20% of a business, and I can take a 20, 30% discount. We can do that. The Biden plan, the Sanders plan, the Obama Green Book plan, all those would take away valuation discounts for what they call passive assets. People put their real estate into a partnership, give it away in pieces to their family, no more discounts. We can take those discounts today. So all these things are possible. We can set up long-term what we call dynasty trusts. Trusts for our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and generations uncontemplated yet. And all that trust would be that every time a generation died off, the tax would be zero. Zero, if you draw the trust the right way. Well, the plan that's being suggested is don't let that happen anymore, only give people 2 generations, and then we're done. Set up a trust in Nevada. Your trust can last 365 years, and it won't be taxed as each generation dies off. I mean, these are planning opportunities that are not pie in the sky, no one's doing this. People are doing this every day. My clients, my colleagues' clients, people I know are setting these things up on a regular basis. So these are things that we can do. Capital gain rate, the maximum rate, federal rate, 20%, 3.8% net investment income tax, so 23.8 is the maximum capital gain rate. The Biden plan, raise that to 39.6 for people whose income's over $1 million. Add your California tax to that. Now you're over 50%. How much of that tax of the California tax can you deduct? $10,000 under federal law. How favorable is that? Well, take advantage of opportunity while it's still out there. So these are some of the things that we want to be looking at. The Biden Green Book's budget plan. If you have a transfer between a grantor and a grantor trust, today not taxable, in the future that transfer is taxable. A grantor pays income tax on income that his or her children are receiving under some special planning opportunities that today are legal. I set up a trust, I set it up in a special way, my kids get all the income, I pay all the income tax. You might say, well, why would you do that? Well, often the parents are wealthier than the children. And so if the parent is reducing his or her estate by paying income tax and the children are getting all that income tax free, that's a good plan. The Biden plan says eliminate that, it's a taxable gift when I pay the income tax for income my kids are receiving. Not today. So all these things are out there. Grass would be killed. You can do a graph, we call it the Walton graph. Mrs. Walton from Arkansas figured this out, one of the Walmart heirs. Gave $100 million into a trust and got all the money back in 2 years, and all the appreciation of the Walmart stock stayed in the trust. Was there a tax on that? No, tax-free. The U.S. tax court said, yeah, you can do that, no problem. The vote in the tax court was 19-0, saying that's okay. They would take that away. So all these things are at risk. Valuation discounts would go away, as I mentioned. There would be a minimum tax on your income when you die. If you have a big estate, that's beyond what most people would have. They would increase the top rate on qualified dividends. What's that now? 20%, 23.8, add the net investment income tax. Raise that to 39.6 if you're a married person with income over $450,000. If you're a single person, income over $400,000. What do we call that? The marriage penalty. You have people that are single, they're thinking about getting married. What do you say? Not so fast, live and sin longer. Let's see what they do with the tax law. Because we don't want to see a situation, you have two people making $390,000 together, that's almost $800,000. They wouldn't be paying a higher rate. They get married, they're well on that higher rate. So another thing to be aware of as we are looking at some of the unhappy planning possibilities. If you have a trust, they're saying if you have more than $10,000 of income, we want to know about that, says the government. Not only on an income tax return, we want a new 1041. Those of you, the CPAs in the audience, they're going to change it. They're talking about changing the 1041, where you file your trust income tax, to have a list of all your assets. And what are they worth at the end of the year? How much are you going to charge your client for a much more involved 1041? How happy will your client be when you triple your bill because you're doing triple the work if this passes? So another thing they want to talk about, generation skipping tax, that dynasty trust for the multiple generations. Every 90 years, they want to treat it mark to market. Treat it at the end of 90 years of the trust, pay tax. They say, okay, well, if they start that today, the law will be well different in 90 years. But wait, that isn't what they're saying. They're saying is this is effective for trusts created on or before, or on and after January 1, 1940. 1940. That means in 2030, you're going to owe a lot of tax on an old trust if your family was able to have a trust then. My family that wasn't my family. But there are people in America that might be in that situation. I know there are. So these are just among the things that they want to change. They're going to raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. There are whole other things that they're talking about, all of which would increase taxes. So what does that say to me as a planner? What should I be telling my clients? If they're going to raise the rates on capital gains, you want to build up basis, because your basis is the measure of your capital gain. So one of my favorite techniques that I always recommend, and I've been talking about the last couple of years, is what I call upstream planning. Think about this. You have low basis assets. You bought stock a long time ago. You're the Peter Lynch of the stock market. You said buy and hold. You bought it low, you held on to it. Now it's really valuable. What are you going to do about that? Well, who's in your family? Is there an elderly person in your family who does not have a taxable estate? grandma, grandpa, they have an estate of maybe a couple $1 million. Not that that's shabby, but the exemption, they're not anywhere near the 12 million or even the 6 or 7 million. Give them the property, give them that asset. If they live more than 1 year and then they die and you get it back, your basis under current law is the fair market value on their date of death. So you have your $25 Apple stock, you give it to grandma, and she dies in a couple of years, you get it back, it's worth $300 a share, your basis is $300. Did she pay estate tax? No, why? She died with a small estate. Did she pay income tax? No, under current law, there is no income tax for her to pay. Now, you get it back and your basis is $300. If you sell it, what's the gain? Zero. So $275 of gain, no tax. Not bad. What if grandma doesn't live a year? Because you have to live a year to make this work. Grandma doesn't live a year and you get it back, you have the same basis you had before. So you gained nothing. But I can say to my clients, I can make this foolproof. I'm going to have grandma sign a codicil to her will or amendment to her trust, and it's going to say, if I own stock given to me by my son or daughter and I die, if I've held it for more than a year, I give it back to my son or daughter. If I've held on to it for less than a year, I give it to my grandchildren. Grandchildren didn't give it to grandma. Grandma could die the day after she got the stock, and the grandkids would get a fair market value at death basis. So this is a foolproof situation. Unless they change the rules, we've guaranteed a basis adjustment somewhere in this picture. So these are things that we want to make sure. Make sure grandma doesn't have a taxable estate, otherwise the plan isn't quite as good. You folks live in a community property estate. You have the best of all worlds with your community property. A person dies, both halves of the community property get a fair market value at death basis under current law. Hopefully that doesn't change. I'm in what we call a common law state. I'm in a state where we don't get stepped up basis automatically if we have jointly held property. We get half the basis step up. So a person with joint assets, that person dies, half the value to the joint holder is fair market value. The other half is the joint holder's original cost. If you have clients with jointly held property, you may think about separating that property into separate names. Is there a likelihood that one spouse is far less healthy than another, may die first? Think about giving that person the assets. If they die, you get a 100% basis adjustment, not a 50% basis adjustment. I'm from New Jersey. We have no problem arranging for the order of deaths. That's one of our specialties in New Jersey. One of the biggest techniques that we've been using in the last couple of years is something called the SLAT, the Spousal Lifetime Access Trust. This is a great way to assure that your clients take maximum advantage of the available transfer tax exclusion. So what is a SLAT? Husband and wife, wife and wife, two husbands, I don't care, married couple, spouse A and B. Spouse A sets up a trust for B and funds it with as much of the $12 million as A is willing to place in the trust, maybe all 12 million. And in that trust, you do not claim the marital deduction. You say, I'm using my exclusion. I'm not taking the deduction that I could normally get when I give property to my spouse. So A puts $12 million in the trust. Spouse gets all the income for life, principal if needed, and when spouse B dies, the kids or grandkids get the money. Is that a gift from A to B? Yes. Is it taxable? No. We've used the lifetime exclusion of A. When B dies, is it part of B's estate? No. B only has a life estate. B didn't put the money in the trust. It's a life estate to B, not taxable when B dies. Kids get the money, no tax to pay. How comfortable are you if that's all you do? Well, maybe spouse A is saying, well, B will share. B will share the income that he or she is getting with me. Well, hopefully that's the case. But maybe A is a little nervous, or the family's wealthy enough, have B set up a trust for A. You can't make them reciprocal. If they're reciprocal or identical, no good. The IRS can say, neither of you set up a valid trust, this doesn't work. So what we do is we set them up so they're not reciprocal. How do we do that? Well, we set them up in different states. Trust A is in California, Trust B is in Nevada. Trust A has a California trustee, Trust B has a Nevada trustee. Trust A has some different terms. It says, when my kids are 50, they get the money. Trust B says it's a trust for the life of my kids. They don't get the money unless the trustee gives it to them. One trust may have a limited power of appointment. One trust may not have that. Now they're not reciprocal. If the IRS puts them side by side, it's easy to check the boxes and say different, 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 move on. That will be a problem. So this is part of the planning that we take advantage of. Where are there two issues that are a problem with the slab? One is spouse A sets it up for B and B dies. Where does the money go now? No longer shared with A, now it goes to the children. And maybe the children aren't going to be as generous as you like them to be. And maybe they're blended family stepchildren, they're not going to be generous at all. So what do we do in that case? We get a life insurance policy on spouse B, and we put it into an irrevocable life insurance trust so that when B dies, the trust pays off and A is the beneficiary. So we get $1 million or $2 million, whatever it is, trust insurance policy on B's life. B dies, the money's in trust for A. A now gets income from the trust and is relieved of the pressure of not getting the income that was in the SLAT originally. So that's one thought. The other danger is divorce. A sets up this trust for B, and B says, finally, I got something nice from you, now I'm leaving you. And A says, well, that's not what I had in mind. B's like, yeah, no kidding. So now what happens? Well, A's out of luck, because if B divorces A, the chance of B sharing with A is very slim. So what do we do in that case? We put language in the trust. We say that I'm going to have a trust protector allowed to add a beneficiary to that trust. But the beneficiary can only be a lineal descendant of a grandparent of the person that set up the trust. Who's that? The person that set up the trust. My grandparents, I'm a lineal descendant of my grandparents. So if I'm spouse A and B divorces, I can say, okay, trust protector, I'm still here. Now I'm a beneficiary. The other way we fix this is we call it the floating spouse provision. And we say the only person who's entitled to get income or principal from this trust is someone who is married to the grantor while the grantor is alive. So if spouse B divorces A, spouse B is no longer married to the grantor. B can get nothing. So we put a price on divorce that is kind of expensive if we want to go in that direction. A technical issue, just to mention it, the general power of appointment. Rather than going into the technical details, what we do is we put language in the trust that says a trust protector or a trustee can give a general power of appointment to a beneficiary. When you have a general power of appointment, that means that all the property's in your estate. Well, is that good or bad? Well, it's good if it means you get a stepped up basis to date of death value. It's bad if you're going to have a taxable estate. So we don't put it in the trust from day one. We wait and we see what develops. Where does the law go? What's the wealth of the beneficiary? And we keep it flexible to make this work. I mentioned the dynasty trust. These are wonderful planning opportunities. You set up a trust and you say, my spouse, my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids, and as I say, generations beyond our contemplation, will get income for life, principal in the trustee's discretion, remainder to their next generation. Each time a person in that generation dies, no tax to pay, because they only have a trust interest. They didn't create the trust. Under current law, you can go forever in these trusts. I mentioned Nevada, 365 years, Wyoming's 1,000 years, Florida's 360, and those are good states to set these up in because they have no income tax. So you got South Dakota, Delaware. Delaware has no income tax on non-resident trust beneficiaries. So you have all these opportunities to make this planning work. Not only is this dynasty trust a good idea from a tax standpoint, but think about it from an asset protection standpoint. If your children, grandchildren, in many generations, it's all up to the trustee to give them income or principal. So if they have judgment creditors, financial creditors, matrimonial creditors, this trust is protected. No one can reach into that trust and pull out the money and say, you have to give it to us. Another area to think about, life insurance. Your client has life insurance. How big is their estate? Most people don't realize that life insurance is a taxable asset of your estate if you die. People say, no, that can't be right, it's tax-free. It's income tax-free from income tax, not estate tax-free from death tax, if you have any control over the policy. So if you can name the beneficiary, if you can do anything with the policy, it's in your estate. Why not get it out of your estate? It's easy to get it out. transfer it to an irrevocable life insurance trust that says upon my death, my spouse or my children get the income, principal if they need it, not taxable when I die, if I live 3 years from the time I transfer the policy. Okay, so don't wait. You might say, well, what's the big deal? Well, what if they brought the exclusion to 5 or 6 million and your client was kind of counting on 12 million? Insurance counts. What if they have $1 million, $2 million life insurance policy? You're eating up 4 or 5, you're eating up 5 of that 5 or 6 million exclusion. You're eating up 2 million or 1 million with life insurance. So I say to the clients, give your life insurance away. And then the client says, well, wait, what if I need it? I say, think about what you just said. How are you going to die and use your insurance money? I say, yeah, I guess that's true. And they said, what if I need the cash value? And I say, I can draft a life insurance trust to say that the trustee can give your spouse or children the cash value, and that way if you need it, we can give it to them and they can give it to you. It'll work, don't worry about it. Think about this. This planning works. The Secure Act, another happy piece of legislation that came about at the end of 2019. The Secure Act said, we're going to change all the rules about retirement plan distributions. Not all, but most. What we're going to say is only certain categories of beneficiaries can still use their life expectancy for distributions. What does that mean? Well, your spouse, a disabled or chronically ill person, a minor child of yours, not your grandkids, a minor child of yours up until age 21, and a beneficiary who is not more than 10 years younger than you. So a sibling, a significant other that you're not married to, could be persons using their life expectancy. Everybody else has this new rule, 10 years. You got to get the money out in 10 years. And they just issued a proposed regulation a month or so ago that made it even worse. They're saying if you die after age 72, your beneficiaries have to take it out on a 10-year basis using their life expectancy, taking money out every year. We thought, and we're still fighting with the government about this because they haven't made the regs final, we thought you would have 10 years, take it out at your own time frame as long as you took it out. But it used to be we could stretch this out. I've got clients with plans that I prepared for them that says, I'm leaving it to my grandkids. And so if you die and your grandkids are single-digit ages or teenage ages, they would have 60 or 70 years to withdraw that money. Think of all the non-tax growth during that time. No more. That's gone. 10 years. So think about how happy you're going to be when your 9-year-old grandchild is the beneficiary upon your death, and when they turn 21, now they're reached majority, they're your grandchild, they get all the money because it's 10 years beyond 9 to 19, 21 they get the money. How'd you like to have a 21-year-old get a couple $1 million from your plan? If they're in college, just think of the spring break they'll have fun going with all their family, all their friends rather, from school. They might just have the entire class go for a couple months. So this is scary in terms of planning. We used to use, and people still use, but we have to think about something called a conduit trust. The conduit trust just passed everything through. I set up a trust, money went into the trust and came out of the trust using life expectancy. That was a slow path, particularly for young beneficiaries. Now, you can't do that anymore. Well, you can do it, but it's a bad idea. So now, what we're talking about is the accumulation trust. The accumulation trust says, you know what we're going to do here? We're going to let the money go into a trust. And the trust is going to say it's up to the trustee when the money gets paid out. Hopefully, we pay it out on a regular basis. Why? Because the trust tax rates are terrible. They're the compressed tax rates. At $13,450 of income, you're in the 37% bracket. As a married person, it's over $600,000. As a single person, it's over $500,000. So we don't want the trust to be the taxpayer. But if we have a problem with the beneficiary, he or she is immature, he or she has got those addictions I talked about, a terrible marriage, terrible creditors, leave the money in the trust, let the trust be the taxpayer, suck that up and accept that because it's better than giving 100% of the money to someone that's going to do something stupid with it than giving the government 37%. They'll do something stupid with it, but the other 63% is still in the trust. That's something you want to be thinking about. But what does that mean? That means we have to convince clients to change things. Because most clients have what I've talked about before, the stretch out to their kids and grandkids. Think about your kids. Let's say a person dies in late 70s, early 80s, an age around that time. Your children have to take the money out based on their life expectancy over 10 years. Well, how old are they if you're 80? Maybe they're 50, 45, 50, 60, somewhere in that range. What are they in their life? They're in their peak earning years. If they're ever going to have great earning years, they tend to be there. Not when they're 20s and not when they're 80s, but somewhere in their 40s, 50s, early 60s, that's when they've become all they can be in their jobs often. So now you're dumping all this retirement plan money on them at ordinary income rates. So they're going to be in the absolute top bracket on every dollar they're getting from your plan. This is a big change. The government found a way to substantially raise taxes without saying they were raising taxes. And congratulations to them. They tricked us all, but that's what's happening. So this is a problem. There's no basis adjustment for retirement plans. It's all ordinary income. The official term is income in respect of the decedent. So we look at that and we say, wow, this is something we have to be careful of. So what are some planning thoughts here? Well, what about a Roth IRA? Think about that. Your client has a retirement plan now. If you convert it to a Roth IRA, you have to suck it up, if you use that expression, and pay that income tax. So you've got a $3 million plan, you're going to give the government a lot of money in income tax. You're going to give them more than $1 million in income tax to convert your $3 million plan to a Roth IRA. But think about when you might want to do it. It doesn't have to be all at once. Think about when the good time is to do that. Let's say your client retires at age 65 or 66. Does he or she have to start taking Social Security? No, you can wait till 70 and get the 8% per year enhancement. Do you have to start taking money for your retirement plan? No, you can wait till age 72. And then you have to start taking money from your plan, and the Secure Act 2.0 working its way through Congress may make that age a little older as the next couple of years go on. So you can wait, but now your income is probably at the lowest level it's going to be for the rest of your life between the time you retire and the time you start taking Social Security and retirement money. You got a $4 or $5 million IRA or 401k, you're going to be taking out $200,000 a year beginning when you start taking money out. Well, that's going to be on top of any other income you have. So that might be a good time to think about the Roth. Another suggestion. Before you retire, take the money out sooner. Don't wait till you're 72. Pay the income tax on an annual basis as you take it out, and use the money net of tax to pay a life insurance premium. Now you put that money into an irrevocable trust. You put the life insurance policy into an irrevocable trust, and what happens? The trust is for your children. And when you die, the money comes out to your children, and when do they have to take it out of the trust? Never. The trust can say, whenever they're mature enough, give it to them. No 10-year withdrawal, no ordinary income to them. I've converted what would be ordinary income to non-taxable income. Another thought. Your client's charitably inclined. Think about this. Set up a charitable remainder trust. Set up a trust that says, I'm making a big gift of my retirement plan to charity. I'm going to get a big income tax deduction for doing that. And then my kids will get, or someone will get, the benefit of an annual annuity. Again, you're getting a tax benefit for the gift to charity. So that's a thought. The Roth conversion, there's two ways to think about it. Current income tax rates are lower than they're going to be in the future, quite possibly. We don't know that, but that's something to be concerned about. Once the person is the recipient, the participant, you take the money out tax-free. Once you do the Roth, it's all tax-free. So if you are investing your money and you have Rip Van Winkle investing your money for you, your money's going to grow. And if it grows, what happens? You don't pay tax on it. That's not a bad idea. When your heirs take the money out, they have to take it out over a 10-year period or over some required period based on the law, but it's tax-free to them. You can't reconvert. You can't convert and do it over like you used to be able to. Unfortunately, that's not available. You can't take an inherited IRA and make it a Roth IRA. That's not available. The House bill is going to make it harder to do this. We don't know if that's going to pass by the Senate. But think about this, and this is the way I always end this discussion about Roth IRAs. Who do you want to pay the tax? Either you're going to pay it or your kids are going to pay it. Someone's going to pay the tax on all this money. If you do the Roth conversion, you're controlling the situation, perhaps, using trusts, protecting your kids from their bad behavior or foolish actions. But you're paying the tax. Other people say, let my kids worry about it. Okay, do nothing and let them pay the tax. Someone's going to pay the tax. And if we look at our crystal ball of where tax law is going to go in the future, maybe not in the next 2 or 3 years, but over the next 20 or 30 years, do you think tax rates are going to go down or go up? My guess is they're going to go up. There are going to be more needy people around, and the government's going to be more aggressive to take care of needy people, and therefore we're going to see tax rates increasing. I hope I'm wrong, but who knows? But that's where you want to look. That's the thing to think about. Last thing to mention. A lot of you, a lot of us, a lot of people, your clients, people you know, did a lot of planning in the last 2 years, and a lot of it was rushed. I know tax attorneys who were working 18 hours a day to try to get everything drafted and signed, and at the first year of the pandemic, we would drive up to a person's house and tap on the window, and they would sign a document that we would FedEx to them, and we'd watch them sign it, and we'd say we can notarize it when you shove it out the door. I mean, this was crazy times. Well, now people are trying to figure out, did we do it all right? It's not too late to think about that. And the IRS, despite the fact that there's still 7 million tax returns sitting in vans around the country in unopened envelopes, they are watching some of these things. And I'm just mentioning on these slides, and these are more technical issues that might be beyond what a lot of you are interested in, but they are focusing on how people make gifts. The case was lost by taxpayers in the tax court because they didn't do it right. And it cost them over $1 million of gift tax when it should have been zero if they'd done it right. There was a IRS CCA, that's a Chief Counsel Advisory, where the person got an appraisal to do a transfer into a GRAT, and then before they did the GRAT, there was a merger, and the property was multiple of value. And they just ignored that. They said, value schmalue, who cares? We're not going to tell the government. Well, the government found out. And they said the whole thing is a disaster. We don't accept any of this. It was a big gift tax due, and shame on the client for not telling the government. Okay? Another case, technical issue, there's a language you put into a trust if you're doing it correctly, that should the IRS change your valuation, there's ways to fix that where you don't get hurt with gift tax. It's properly proper. The courts have accepted it, at least the tax courts accepted it. But if you don't do it right, if you don't put the right magic words in, you lose. Well, in this case, the Nelson case, they put the wrong magic words in. They forgot to put them in or failed to put them in, and it cost over $4 million in gift tax that could have been zero if they had done it right. So if you've had clients that have done sophisticated, aggressive planning in the last 2 years, hopefully it was all perfect. I'm not saying it wasn't, but maybe say to them, just step back now and let your attorneys look at it. Maybe they haven't even filed their 2021 tax returns yet. They're on extension not due till October of 22. You got time to fix a mistake. If you're not reporting it yet, you got time to fix it. We have had what I like to call the golden age of estate and tax planning in the last 20 years. We as planners have been able to do incredibly excellent planning, all legal, all proper. The IRS can be looking over our shoulder and they have to say, yeah, you did it, just like the law says. How much longer will this go on? Well, maybe over in months, maybe over in years. But this is the chance to get it right. This is the chance to say to your clients, and again, whether you're their lawyer, their accountant, their friend, their person that knows them professionally and not in the tax profession, make sure you're talking to your right people. Make sure you're thinking about all this. Have the discussion with the clients. Conversation with clients is the key to good planning. With that, the most important slide of all, thank you all very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lisa. Thanks for a very insightful conversation. Can you talk a little bit about the LLC and gifting that to beneficiaries?
Well, you have an LLC, if you have an LLC. If you give 100% of it to a beneficiary, then there's no discount available. You get an appraisal, you figure out what it's worth, and you file a gift tax return saying you did that. A better plan might be, under current law, divide it into pieces and give a minority piece to each beneficiary. If you have, let's say, 4 children, give them each 10 or 15% if you're willing to let them collectively have majority control. Or give them 12% to keep it under 50%. If you do that, now you can claim a valuation discount. Aggressively over 30%, conservatively in the teens, practically 25 to 30. IRS will offer 12. If you ask for 40, you'll have a fight. If you ask for 25 to 30 and they audit, you may settle, you may just get it. But that's what I would do.
So you don't have, like, you know, the property, if you give it to your kids, you get the step on the basis. With an LLC, you don't.
No, whenever you make a gift under current law, the donee takes the donor's basis.
Right.
So that may not be happy news, but if you see a lot of growth in the future, if you hang on to it and the growth makes you a taxpayer at death, getting the stepped up basis isn't as valuable as it might be if you weren't going to be a taxpayer at death.
Steve, if you'll hang around and answer questions.
No problem.
Still coffee and food outside, but just for the benefit of everyone who's been here, thank you very much, Steve, for coming and
Are you welcome?
give a sense of kind of wisdom that's around ourselves. Steve did a fantastic job of explaining.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.
I'm going
If
to
you
pass the
want to
mic over to
keep
Danny,
me
but I just
coming.
wanted to sort of formally draw the
Okay,
presentation.
no, thank you.
Thank you.
2 quick questions.
Yes.
If you converted something to a Roth in the event of a Sanders type of administration, is there a way that they can, if you convert something to a Roth IRA, in the event of a Sanders type of administration, can they change the laws on the Roth so that that is taxable?
Okay.
Question 1.
I think if I understand your question, are you worried, you're concerned that maybe they would change the Roth rules and make it taxable? I think, again, no one knows for sure, but my sense would be if they change it, it would be changed prospectively. Because that would be a terrible, just a complete denial of what they've done, to say suddenly we're going to make it taxable. It's like if they ever go to carryover basis, complete carryover basis, they have to pick a date after which it's effective. One would hope. They may not, but for the Roth, I would think they owe it to everybody to be fair and say if you did a Roth before, you get the rules from before. If you change it, if we're going to make the law effective 1/1/23, any Roth after that would be taxable that you set up, that at least we'll know what they're doing.
The other question is about transferring ownership of an asset to an older person so that when they die, they will come back to you at the fair market value of that. My understanding is that when that happens, it changes the basis for the real estate tax today. So if I bought a property $1 million and I am paying real estate tax today at $1 million and I transfer it over to my mother, now it's worth $4 million, my new real estate tax base is going to be $4 million.
Okay, what you're raising is a California issue. I think you're correct, but I'm not the California expert. I'm talking about federal tax, which would be the result that I'm suggesting. But if for a California tax issue, if that transfer creates a